Today we uncover the shocking truth about the eggs sold in UK supermarkets. One of Britain's biggest supermarkets has just confirmed it's phasing out brown eggs entirely from its own brand range, switching everything over to white by 2028. So if you've got a box of brown eggs in your fridge right now, you might genuinely want to treasure them, because before long, that familiar brown shell could be gone from the shelf for good. Because when one of them starts, eventually the others all seem to follow. Now remember the 1970s when almost every egg in a British kitchen had a shell so thick you had to give it a good whack on the side of the bowl, and whites that stood up proud in the pan instead of spreading out like a puddle. For a lot of us back then, every egg was simply an egg. It came from a hen, maybe even from your granddad's back garden, where a couple of rescue hens lived the life of Riley on kitchen scraps. It tasted of something, and nobody was charging you triple for so-called organic. And here's the reasoning behind the switch. A lower carbon footprint, these hens supposedly live longer and eat less, giving a carbon footprint around 12.7% lower. And here's the irony that stings the most. Back in the 1970s, it was clever marketing that convinced British shoppers brown eggs were somehow more rustic, more natural, more wholesome than plain old white ones. Now, half a century on, the very same industry is quietly reversing that story to save itself money and carbon. The label changes whenever it suits them, and never quite whenever it suits you or your family. And it gets stranger. A recent study from Oxford University suggests that organic free-range eggs, the very ones we've all been guilt-tripped into buying, actually carry roughly double the greenhouse emissions of eggs from caged hens, simply because those caged birds are packed in tight and hyper-efficient. And reportedly, the rules were also quietly changed around bird flu housing orders, meaning some of the free-range eggs sitting on the shelf this morning may have come from hens that were kept indoors for months at a time. So here's the big, uncomfortable question. Are supermarkets about to use net zero as the perfect excuse to quietly march us all back towards intensive industrial farming? Because that's the direction this seems to be heading. And while all of this plays out in boardrooms, ordinary shoppers are getting squeezed harder than ever. Egg prices are now running more than 50% higher than they were at the start of the cost of living crisis. A six-pack that cost £1 in 2022 now routinely sits at £1.50 or more. We're paying more for smaller shells, watery whites, and a whole lot of marketing. And if you've spotted those frightening headlines this week screaming at you to throw your eggs away over a safety scare, take a breath, because that particular recall is an American one affecting US brands and doesn't touch British shelves at all. But the everyday squeeze on price and quality here at home is very real. For a lot of us, the egg aisle has become peak smoke and mirrors Britain. So we've gone back through the major eggs sold in UK supermarkets today, checked the current labels, the current welfare claims, the current prices, and the very latest news. We're going to count down 9 eggs you may want to leave on the shelf, and then reveal 4 you can genuinely still trust. Some of these verdicts have changed since last time, and at least one of them may surprise you. Before we get cracking, please do hit that like button, and more importantly, smash the hype button underneath this video. It costs you absolutely nothing, but it pushes this investigation in front of more shoppers. It helps ordinary people fight back against this supermarket extortion, and it sends a message to these companies that we're watching what they put on our plates. It's a tiny click for a genuinely worthwhile cause. And let's get into it. Number 9. Sainsbury's Woodland Eggs. These are organic eggs certified by the Soil Association. They carry the RSPCA Assured stamp, they're British Lion marked, and Sainsbury's even donates a penny per dozen to the Woodland Trust for tree planting. So why are they opening our list? Let's start with the word woodland itself. Plenty of shoppers see that name and picture their hens wandering happily under a canopy of oak trees, pecking through a proper forest. The truth is that woodland isn't a protected welfare category with its own legal meaning. It's a brand name. It's doing a lot of gentle, reassuring work on that carton, and the imagery invites you to imagine something more idyllic than the standard definitions actually guarantee. That, plainly, is marketing fluff. Then there's the bigger story hanging over the whole Sainsbury's egg range. As we mentioned, Sainsbury's has announced it's phasing out its own brand brown eggs and moving over to white by 2028, all in the name of carbon savings. Rivals like Waitrose and Morrison's have publicly said they'll keep selling brown eggs, so you've now got supermarkets openly splitting down the middle on strategy. It's a strange moment to witness. Two giant chains looking at exactly the same carbon maths and reaching completely opposite conclusions, while the shopper stuck in the middle is left to guess which one is really acting in their interest. It isn't fully clear where that leaves this particular brown-shelled line in the long run, but when a supermarket is publicly reworking its entire egg range around carbon targets rather than around your breakfast, it's fair to ask whether the welfare and woodland story on the front is really the priority behind the scenes. We're not telling you these are cruel or low welfare eggs, because those certifications are genuinely among the better ones on the shelf. But you are paying a premium price, and a good chunk of what you're paying for is the imagery, the name, and that warm woodland feeling. If you're buying these because you assumed woodland was a guarantee of something extra special, it's worth knowing it's a label, not a law. And that gap between what the box whispers and what the label actually promises is what this whole video is about. Number 8. M&S Select Farms Free Range. M&S has built an empire on the idea that everything it sells is just a little bit special. The soft lighting in the adverts, the smooth voiceover, the elegant fonts on the packaging. Their Select Farms range is the flagship of that promise. But when it comes to their free-range eggs, you have to ask a simple question. Are you paying for better hens? Or for the M&S logo? Because these don't come cheap. Reportedly, once you break the price down, M&S free-range eggs can work out at somewhere around 46 pence per egg, which puts them among the priciest standard cartons you'll find in a mainstream supermarket. At that price, you might reasonably expect a genuinely different tier of welfare, something well beyond the norm. Here's the more complicated reality. To M&S's credit, they do run a well-documented program called Farm of the Future with Harper Adams University, aimed at decarbonizing and lifting welfare standards across their supply chain. And that's a genuine, positive effort worth acknowledging. But at the checkout, what you're carrying home is still, at its core, a free-range egg. It meets free-range standards. The premium you're handing over doesn't automatically buy you a completely different world from the free-range carton sitting in another supermarket for noticeably less money. And this is the trap. The packaging, the brand, the reputation, all of it gives the impression that you're buying into a higher class of egg. That premium image is doing an awful lot of work, and for a family carefully counting every penny in the current climate, that's exactly the kind of gentle upsell that quietly drains the weekly shop. Our advice is simple. If you love M&S and you can comfortably afford it, enjoy them. But don't assume the higher price tag is automatically buying you dramatically higher welfare. A lot of the time, you're mostly paying for those 3 little letters on the box. Number 7. Co-op British free-range eggs. The Co-op has always leaned hard into ethics. It's baked into their whole identity, the cooperative movement, community values, doing the right thing. And a big part of that reassurance on eggs like these is the RSPCA Assured stamp. To a lot of shoppers, that little logo feels like a cast-iron promise that the hens behind your breakfast had a decent life. But here's where things get uncomfortable. There's a widespread feeling among British shoppers that the RSPCA Assured scheme has become something of a toothless watchdog, more of a welfare washing exercise than a genuine guarantee. Over the last couple of years, that scheme has faced serious public criticism and some awkward questions about whether the standards on the label really match the conditions on every farm behind it. We're not leveling a specific accusation at the Co-op's own hens here, and it's only fair to say so plainly. But when so much of a product's ethical appeal rests on a single assurance stamp, and that stamp is under this much scrutiny, it's fair enough to be a little skeptical about how much comfort it should really buy you. And it's worth remembering that the Co-op, for all its principles, is a business first. Back in 2024, they rolled out British white free-range eggs alongside the brown ones across thousands of stores, part of that same industry-wide shuffle we keep bumping into. These aren't bad eggs by any stretch, and they're perfectly decent value for what they are. But if you're reaching for them specifically because the branding makes you feel you're taking the moral high ground, just know that the stamp on the box carries a lot less certainty than it once seemed to. Quick one before we go on. If this kind of plain-talking look at what's really on our shelves is your sort of thing, do consider subscribing because we've got plenty more of these investigations lined up. Number 6. Asda Just Essentials Free Range. Asda's Just Essentials range has been a genuine lifeline for millions of families through the cost of living squeeze, and we want to be absolutely clear about something. There is no shame whatsoever in buying budget eggs when money's tight. None at all. Feeding your family affordable protein is exactly what these are for. And on paper, this 15-egg pack ticks the boxes. British Lion marked, Class A, and free range. But this is where a lot of you have been telling a very consistent story. Many shoppers report that the quality just isn't what it should be. The complaints follow the same pattern again and again. Shells so thin they seem to shatter the moment they touch the edge of the bowl. Whites that don't hold together, spreading out across the frying pan like water instead of setting up proud the way they used to. Yolks that break the second you look at them sideways. Now, we have to be fair. This is consumer experience rather than a proven across-the-board defect, and eggs naturally vary from pack to pack and farm to farm. Thin shells can point to older hens or birds under a bit of stress, and watery whites often just mean an egg that's been sitting around a while. But none of that is confirmed for this specific line. What we can say is that the pattern of complaints is strikingly familiar to anyone who's cracked a disappointing budget egg lately, and it lines up with a wider frustration people have about quality quietly sliding while prices climb. Here's the honest takeaway. At the very bottom of the market, you often do get what you pay for, and the gap between a cheap free-range egg and a mid-range one can show up right there in your pan on a Sunday morning. If these work for your budget, that's completely valid, and we'd never tell you otherwise. Just go in with your eyes open and know that the occasional puddle white and paper-thin shell isn't your imagination. Number 5. The Happy Egg Co. If there's one brand that captures everything this video is about, it's this one. Just look at the packaging. Rolling green hills, cheerful cartoon chickens, sunshine and freedom. It's a picture of countryside paradise, and it's carefully designed to make you feel warm and virtuous as you drop it into your trolley. But here's the fact that really matters. In April 2025, a campaign group called A Bit Weird submitted a formal complaint to the UK's Competition and Markets Authority, alleging that the parent company behind this brand, Noble Foods, engages in misleading welfare marketing, something they've nicknamed egg washing. Now, that's an allegation, not a proven ruling, and it's important to say that clearly. But it tells you that the gap between the idyllic image and the industrial reality is now serious enough for campaigners to take it all the way to the regulator. And what is that reality? Reportedly, flocks under this kind of free-range model can run up to 16,000 birds in a single shed. That's within the legal maximums, but it's a very long way from the handful of happy hens roaming a wildflower meadow that the box invites you to picture. It's also worth knowing that Noble Foods, the company behind all this sunshine and cartoon branding, is a large-scale egg producer supplying eggs across multiple welfare tiers, not some tiny family smallholding on a hillside. And it's worth sitting with that contrast for a moment. On one side, a box promising sunshine freedom and a hen living her very best life. On the other, a large industrial operation supplying eggs across every welfare tier under different names on different shelves. Countless of you have told us the same thing over the years. The friendlier the cartoon on the front, the more suspicious you've learned to become about what's actually inside. That traditional wholesome image is doing an enormous amount of work here. The name itself, Happy Egg, is a marketing masterstroke because it plants the conclusion in your head before you've read a single line of the label. Our verdict is that this is industrial egg production wearing a great big smile, and if we're honest, the smile is really the product. By the way, I'd genuinely love to hear from you on this one. Have you noticed the shells getting thinner, or a brand that used to be brilliant slowly slipping in quality? Drop it in the comments and let me know which eggs you swear by and which ones have let you down. Number 4. Caged and enriched colony eggs. Now, this one actually comes with a genuine and rather welcome piece of good news, and it's a lovely example of why we always check the very latest facts rather than just repeating what was true a year ago. For a long time, the big criticism aimed at Britain's largest supermarket was that it clung on to selling caged eggs long after some rivals had moved on. But here's the update. In 2026, Tesco confirmed it had completed its full transition to 100% cage-free own-brand shell eggs across the UK and Ireland. And that switch was independently verified by the campaign group Compassion in World Farming in its Egg Track report. Credit where credit's due, that's a real change for the better, and we're not going to bash them for a problem they've genuinely fixed. But don't uncork the champagne just yet, because the wider issue hasn't gone away. Caged eggs, produced in what's now politely called the enriched colony system, are still perfectly legal in Britain. They still exist, they still turn up on other shelves, and crucially, they're still poured by the millions into processed foods, cakes, mayonnaise, quiches, all sorts of things where no cheerful cartoon has to look you in the eye. The enriched cage is a modest upgrade on the old battery cage, but for the hen, it's still a life spent in a confined space, never once feeling grass under her feet. And there's a close cousin of this trick worth flagging while we're here. Watchdogs have been warning shoppers that the words cage-free are not the same promise as free range. A cage-free hen can still spend her whole life indoors, packed into a crowded barn, never once feeling sunlight or grass beneath her. It sounds enormously reassuring on the front of a box, but it's doing far less work than you'd naturally assume. When in doubt, ignore the friendly phrase entirely and go straight to the number on the shell. So how do you steer clear? It comes down to one number stamped on the shell. If it starts with a 3, that's a caged hen. 3 is the one to avoid. We'll come back to that little code very shortly, because it's honestly the single most useful thing you can learn in this whole video. The point of this entry isn't to name and shame one particular shop, it's to remind you that still legal and no longer sold at your usual supermarket are two very different things. Number 3. Roadside Honesty Box Eggs. Now for something completely different, and something a lot of you have quietly wondered about. Picture the scene. You're driving through the countryside on a Sunday. You spot a little roadside stall, a wooden box, a handwritten sign, a tin for your coins. Local eggs, straight from the farm, sold on trust. It's one of the most charming traditions we've got left, and the vast majority of them are exactly what they claim to be: honest people selling honest eggs. But savvy shoppers have started warning each other about a sneaky little trick that a small number of sellers have reportedly been spotted pulling. The concern is that the odd roadside box isn't always filled with the fresh local eggs you'd naturally assume. Instead, some have allegedly been quietly topped up with cheap eggs bought in bulk, sometimes lower welfare or imported, then sold on at a tidy markup to passing travellers who'll never come back to complain. Now, I want to be careful here because this is consumer chatter rather than any kind of proven widespread problem, and I'm certainly not accusing your local egg lady of anything. But it does lead us to the single most valuable habit you can pick up in the whole egg aisle: learn to read the stamp printed on the egg itself. In the UK, every properly marked egg carries a code, and the very first digit tells you the whole welfare story. A 0 means organic, a 1 means free range, a 2 means barn. A3 means caged. After that digit, you'll see the letters UK, confirming it's genuinely British, followed by the individual farm's registration number. So if you're ever unsure whether it's a roadside box or the fanciest carton in the shop, don't trust the picture on the front, trust the number on the shell. It can't lie to you the way a cartoon chicken can. Number 2. Tesco Finest Free Range. We've already given Tesco a fair bit of credit today, and that still stands. But their premium finest free-range eggs deserve a moment of scrutiny because they play the exact same game we saw with M&S, just under a different logo. Everything about the finest range is designed to whisper luxury at you. The heavier, darker packaging, the word finest itself, sitting there like a quiet promise. You pick it up and you feel like you're treating yourself to something a cut above the ordinary carton, and you're paying accordingly. Here's where we have to be careful and fair. We can't tell you these come from some inferior source, and we're not going to pretend we've personally traced every farm, because we haven't. What we can say is that a premium free-range egg is, at its heart, still a free-range egg meeting the same underlying standard as a cheaper one. The elegant packaging is doing a great deal of the persuading. You might reasonably expect that finest signals a genuinely different welfare tier, but the word is a brand descriptor, not a separate legal category with tougher rules sitting behind it. This is the premium trap all over again, and it's worth spotting because it's absolutely everywhere in the egg aisle. 2 cartons, broadly similar eggs inside, wildly different prices, and the gap explained largely by cardboard, fonts, and a reassuring name. If you enjoy them and the price sits comfortably with you, that's entirely your call. But if you're reaching for finest purely because you assume the hens must have lived a finer life, just know that the assumption is exactly what the packaging is quietly counting on. Number 1. Sainsbury's Golden Yolk. And here we are at number 1. And this is another updated verdict that might sting a little, because this is a product we've spoken well of before. Sainsbury's Golden Yolk eggs sold on one simple, powerful promise, right there in the name. A richer, deeper, more golden yolk, the kind of glorious sunset orange color that makes a fried egg look like something straight off a restaurant menu. And here's the uncomfortable truth that lands this one at the very top of our list. That deep golden color, the entire selling point, tells you almost nothing about the quality, the welfare, or the nutrition of the egg inside. Yolk color is one of the easiest things in the whole industry to control, and it's done simply through what the hens are fed. Add natural pigments to the feed, things like marigold petals or paprika extract, and the yolk turns a gorgeous deep orange. Take them back out, and it fades to a pale yellow. The hen's life, the taste, the goodness inside, none of that necessarily changes one bit. Only the color does. So when a product is built and named around that rich golden yolk and charges a premium for the privilege, you're essentially paying extra for a color that can be dialed up or down at the feed trough. Consumer watchdogs have been warning about this exact trick, urging shoppers not to pay more for a deep orange yolk because nutritionally, it means next to nothing. It's one of the purest examples of selling the sizzle rather than the sausage in the entire aisle. And it's the sort of thing that quietly nags at anyone who remembers when a rich yolk simply meant a decent hen having a decent day, not a marketing department reaching for the paprika. And just think for a moment about what a rich yolk used to actually mean. It meant a hen that had genuinely been out scratching about, eating greens and bugs, and living something close to a natural life. And that deep color was simply the honest byproduct of it. It was a signal you could trust with your own eyes. Now that very same color can be conjured up in a feed shed regardless of how the bird actually lives. Which means the one visual cue our parents and grandparents relied on has been quietly hollowed out and sold straight back to us at a premium. That's the bit that really gets me. To be crystal clear, these aren't harmful eggs, and they may well taste perfectly lovely on your toast. But as a piece of clever marketing that turns a purely cosmetic tweak into a premium selling point, Golden Yolk earns its place right here at the top. Once you know how the trick works, you honestly can't unsee it, and you'll never look at a suspiciously orange supermarket yolk quite the same way again. So, after all that, how do you actually cut through the smoke and mirrors and find an egg you can trust? It's simpler than the supermarkets would like you to believe. First, look for the red British Lion mark, which covers food safety and vaccination against salmonella. Second, and most importantly, ignore the cartoons, the rolling hills, and the reassuring buzzwords, and go straight to that code stamped on the shell. Commit it to memory. 0 for organic, 1 for free range, 2 for barn, 3 for caged. That single digit tells you more than the entire front of the box ever will. And third, don't automatically pay extra just for a fancy brand name or a suspiciously deep orange yolk. With all that in mind, here are 4 eggs we think are genuinely worth your money. First, Waitrose British Blacktail. Waitrose has built a strong reputation over the years for taking hen welfare seriously, and their Blacktail eggs are the flagship of that. The brand highlights higher welfare standards for these hens, and it's one of the big reasons they've earned so much loyalty from shoppers who really do care where their breakfast comes from. They're not the cheapest, no, but if welfare genuinely matters to you and Waitrose is within reach, these are a dependable, honest choice that broadly lives up to its billing. Second, St. Ewe. This is a Cornish brand and a certified B Corp, which means it's held to some genuinely serious standards around welfare and running the business responsibly. But honestly, the reason people fall in love with these is the taste. There's a widespread glowing reputation around St. Ewe for their rich yolks and proper old-fashioned flavor, the kind of egg that actually reminds you what a fried egg is supposed to taste like. Through 2026, they've kept being singled out for their high welfare standards, even branching out into professional kitchens. The only mild grumble we'd pass on is that the printed dates can be a touch fiddly to read on the carton, but that's a tiny quibble against a genuinely excellent egg. Third, Clarence Court Burford Browns. Now these are a premium choice, and yes, they're pricey, and we'll be straight with you, feed does influence that lovely deep yolk here just as it does everywhere else. But what you're really paying for with Clarence Court is the heritage breed and the slow-laying welfare approach, which is genuinely among the best you'll find anywhere in a mainstream supermarket. One quick word of warning though. There's been a reported trick recently where cheaper eggs get swapped into premium Burford Brown cartons, so do check for the little crown logo stamped on each individual shell to make sure you've got the real thing. Fourth, Aldi and Lidl organic eggs. This is the working class ethical choice, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment. Now these are two separate supermarkets with their own separate ranges, not one single product, but the principle is exactly the same. Both discounters offer organic eggs, that all-important zero on the shell, at prices that don't demand a second mortgage. Recent consumer tests in 2026 have repeatedly found that these budget retailers beat the big names on both price and welfare. If you want higher welfare organic eggs without paying M&S money, this is quite possibly the smartest buy in the entire aisle. And there you have it, 9 eggs to think twice about, and 4 that genuinely earn their place in your basket. The lesson running through all of it is the same. The picture on the box is marketing, the number on the shell is the truth. If this opened your eyes even a little, please give the video a like, hit that hype button to help push it in front of more shoppers, and subscribe so you don't miss the next investigation. And drop me a comment telling me exactly which food or product you want us to dig into next. Until next time, stay sharp, check the stamp, and protect your plate.